Thank you, and good evening. I'm delighted to be here at this wonderful dinner celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Public Policy Forum, combined with a fitness program, because I think by the end of the evening you'll all be in better shape. When I look at this dinner, you know, it just kills me that I'm not running for something and that this isn't my fundraiser. But if it can't be for me, what better cause? Being Prime Minister of Canada was an enormous honor, and I have always been enormously grateful to the people throughout my political career who put themselves on the line, who knocked on doors, who wrote the checks, who made the calls, to make it possible for me to go to school in one of the world's great democracies. We often refer to me as Canada's first female Prime Minister, and alas, to date, the only female Prime Minister. But I had some other firsts as well. I was the first Prime Minister to have been born and raised in British Columbia, and the first to have held elected office at all three levels of government. And it gave me a particular perspective. When I was Prime Minister, for example, I was the first Prime Minister to convene a First Ministers' Conference to prepare strategy for the G7 summit. And I was reminding Bob Rae tonight that when he was Premier of Ontario, he refused to come. But everybody else did. But it was, in fact, because, as someone who had served at the provincial level, I understood how important the jurisdictions at the provincial level were and how important the responsibilities were at the provincial level in making these overall economic decisions. And it was actually a wonderful gathering, wonderful meeting, and very useful. And I had hoped to create that as a leitmotif of what I had hoped would be a much longer administration. Listening to John Turner speak about his concerns about Parliament reminds me of my own campaign for the leadership. One of the documents that I put out was called Doing Politics Differently. And I spoke about many of the same things, how I felt that in Canada we had come to use the whip too much, how one of the most difficult things in the Canadian Parliament is to be a backbencher on the government side. Because all the work you do to promote the interests of your constituents is done behind closed doors. There's a kind of an etiquette that you don't criticize the government. You may yell and scream and rail in your caucus meetings or in personal meetings with the minister, but when it comes to the public, you close ranks. And that can often give the impression to your constituents that, in fact, you have gone Ottawa, that you've simply, you're towing the line. And I think that there needs to be much more opportunity for members of Parliament to take a creative and constructive role in developing policy. Obviously, when a party runs on a platform, the party members should be willing to support that. But there are many other issues that arise where we don't have a prior commitment to any particular point of view. The other thing I want to comment about is the fact that I still am the only woman to have been Prime Minister of Canada. And you know, I never wanted to make a career of being a former Prime Minister of Canada, you know, a little tiara that flashes former PM. I have discovered that it is a piece of political capital that enables me to open doors and to accomplish things. And I want to do honor to Canadians in how I use that opportunity to create access for people to advance. I work a lot around the world in democracy promotion and causes of the advancement of women. But I have just come up from Florida, where I attended for the second year in a row a Wall Street Journal task force on women in the economy. And, you know, actuarially speaking, I may still be around for the 50th anniversary of the Public Policy Forum. But I am getting older, and I am struck by hearing, even in the corporate world, the same kinds of concerns raised about the barriers to women in getting up into that top level of corporations. And it's complex. A lot of it has to do with the way women themselves see their possibilities, and a lot of it has to do with the tendency of many organizations to self-replication. A couple of years ago, I was honored also here in Toronto by Equal Voice. And I made a proposal then that I think is worth thinking about. I believe it's time for us to see gender as a basic default definition of our society. In the same way we would never think of privileging one province over another in terms of representation, there are many ways in which we see categories of Canadians that are the basis on which we allocate certain resources. But I think it's time for us to see male and female as that as well. And what I proposed was not proportional representation. I don't think that fits into our system, but a redrawing of the electoral boundaries in Canada. Not a redrawing of the electoral boundaries. It would wind up probably being a redrawing of electoral boundaries to consolidate some of them. But that every constituency in Canada become a two-member constituency, and that each constituency elect one man and one woman. We would have instant parity. There would be no competition within a party between the men and women for the nomination, no need to be nasty. And as David Mitchell, my fellow British Columbian, can tell you, in our province, we had two-member constituencies. When I was elected first to the legislature of the province of British Columbia from Vancouver Point Grey, I was one of two members elected. And as it happened, we were both women, and we were from different parties. It can be done. It would simply, in one swell swoop, one fell swoop, really a swell swoop, I think, solve the problem. Now, it's also a challenge to women. Women would have to stand up and be counted and be part of this. But I think it would instantly change the sense of what is possible for Canadian women, the sense of what is just for Canadian men and women. And I think it would be an example to the rest of the world that Canada has found an ingenious way to do something fairly, without quotas, without affirmative action, which Americans are very excited about. That would address the gender balance. And finally, I want to say that public policy frames our lives, shapes how we live, because it is the product of governance. And caring about public policy is one of the most important things that any citizen can do, to be engaged in how policy is made, who makes it, what interests are represented. I mentioned that I do a lot of work in democracy promotion. 40 years ago today, I was in Kiev as a graduate student at London School of Economics, a graduate student in Soviet government, in the second month of a 3-month study trip of the USSR. 4 weeks ago, I was in Kiev as chair of the Foundation for Effective Governance, a foundation that tries to promote economic reform in Ukraine, and in many ways acts almost like a public service, because there is not a government bureaucracy that has the capacity to do the kind of policy analysis, to do the translation of ideas into programs and services that are something that we take so much for granted. And so this foundation is playing that role, ideally with the idea that someday Ukraine may be able to do it itself. The world is full of countries struggling to create democracies. And we have in Canada not a perfect democracy, but a democracy that's remarkably well served if we preserve the disinterested, nonpartisan public service, if we preserve the freedom of the press, if we preserve the quality of our research institutions, and particularly if we continue to have organizations like the Public Policy Forum that bring all of these people together. Because it's not just enough to have research, you have to test ideas, and you have to bring together the people who will live with the results of policy, with those who are trying to frame it in the context of what is constitutional, of what meets regional interests, etc. And that is why tonight we are honoring an important tile in the mosaic of what makes a great democracy, in honoring the Public Policy Forum. There are many places in the world that simply do not have that. And when I travel to new struggling democracies, I was in Tunisia a few weeks ago, I am struck by the incredible global lottery that I won to be born in Canada, to be born into this mature democracy. And I want to thank Canadians in Vancouver, British Columbia, and across this country for all that you have taught me about how democracy ought to work, about how much there is to learn from citizens all over the country. And I want to thank all of you here tonight for your engagement and your caring. And someday, if I ever run again, I hope you'll turn up for my fundraiser, because this is an awesome group. Thank you.